Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Epay Tips and Changes webinar. This one for the week of March the 7th. Now, as always, as we do in all our sessions, we do mute all attendees. So please ask your questions via the GoToWebinar question area of the control panel, and I'll be happy to answer those questions at the appropriate time. Now, as a friendly reminder, we do record these webinars. So after the session is over today, they'll be available not only on Gateway, but also on YouTube. And YouTube is what I stress to everyone to pass on the word on this call for those that could not attend, that they're more than welcome to go out there at your convenience or their convenience and search for Epay for Epay for ISS Facility Services. And by searching for that, you'll be able to pull up all of our webinars we've done, pretty much all of them this year out on YouTube. So as you read in your Epay update this week, we'll have a session today, obviously, for the Epay Tips and Changes webinar. We'll do another one on next Tuesday, which will be identical. So no session next Thursday, but just to remind everyone on the call. Now, as we go through here, obviously today's topics are going to be pretty short and simple to the point. We're going to review the JDE to Blue Force process. I think that's one of the big things that not everyone quite grasps, how information goes from one system to the other. So as we go through that review, I'm going to go through and just basically discuss, what is the system of record? What does that mean? You may hear that a lot, either from us in the IT Epay team, but also from the finance and payroll teams. We'll also talk about setting up new jobs, employees, and work orders, kind of what does that entail. We won't go through the process of how to do that, but I want to focus on the setup as it relates to the process here, the big picture. And then we'll talk about inactivating jobs, employees, and work orders, kind of how that happens as well. And then just in general, understand how our interfaces work. That way you understand a little bit better how and when data transfers from our different systems. And then once we do that, I'm going to just have a quick brief discussion on scenarios as to when to use a time card versus a timesheet. I think, most of us have been on the system for a year, but not everyone still grasps the difference between the time card and timesheets. I want to address that on a call today. So once again, let's get started. Let's go right into our first topic today. And as I mentioned, our very first topic will revolve around the Blue Force process. So as always, I'm going to go through a few slides, and where needed, I'll go through and actually log into Blue Force and show you some bits and pieces that might be of help to you maintaining an understanding for these different topics. So first topic here, Epay Blue Force process. So one of the big questions that always comes out is, how do we interact with the system? I mean, what are the different things that are in play when we're using Blue Force? So on my first slide here, I want to just go through the basic question of how do our employees interact with Blue Force, and our employees being our frontline employees as well as us on this phone call today. So first thing, as everyone knows, the employee is required to punch in via one of the various time collection methods. So obviously the employee is going to use a Walter, the time clock there, the phone in, which is the phone system, the mobile punch, which is a mobile app on the smartphone, or via web punch, which is actually a app via the internet you can use on your computer. But one of these four ways, that's the employee's responsibility, is to punch in and punch out. Now, a supervisor or manager, which in most cases, those are your editors and submitters, they're going to review those punches daily. Just kind of from a standard standpoint, you have to go through and review those punches as closely to a daily basis as possible. Managers could also be the submitter, but typically the manager who is in charge of the job site, or even more importantly, maybe a district manager. Those are typically your submitters around the country, but your submitters will have to review the time as well, but specifically they have the ability now to submit. So keep in mind that a submission or the submittal process is basically you reviewing your time as a manager and then saying it looks good and basically checking that off and having your sign off. So that's what the submit does. Now the next level from that is your admin and or maybe a different manager on site, is the approver. In most cases, the payroll admin at the office, the various field offices around the country, those are the ones that are typically the approvers. Anyhow, they're going to review the time once more, just give it one last look over, and then click on approve, which then gives corporate payroll the ability now to take over the payroll and begin their processing. So exactly at that point, they begin to export the time to JD Edwards to process your payroll and obviously fund your pay cards, print your checks, basically funding payroll. So all in all, this is kind of all the different roles, I guess you can refer to them as, but it's kind of how the employees are interacting with the system. Now, I think you're going to find that most of us on these phone calls are going to be at that manager, the submitter, and the approver levels. But bottom line, the main reason from this particular slide that we always stress, have your employees clock in and clock out, and if they're not doing it right, show them how to do it right. That's the heart of the whole process in Blueforce. Now that's from the user perspective, and it's kind of a big picture. And you may have seen this in this same picture on previous webinars, but this big picture is kind of how everything is flowing from a system, from one system to another. So as I mentioned there, you have all your different various methods of punching in and punching out, and I'll go through a little more depth of these methods here a little bit on another slide, but they all correspond to Blueforce, and Blueforce is the program you log into to review punches and all that good stuff. But as you go into that those screens to review punches, know that once you go in there and submit and approve, the system actually sends that kind of those gears right there, sends that information over to JDE, to which at that point JDE is the system that actually goes and pays, funds the paychecks, the pay cards, and the direct deposits. So kind of from a big picture, that's kind of the flow of time capture from Blueforce over to JD Edwards. Now, like I say, as a friendly reminder, submitters and approvers, once again, you make sure that everything is finalized before payroll starts to be processed. So once again, this is kind of a big picture from a usage standpoint. Responsibility is to make sure all hours are accounted for and ensure that employees punching in and out on a daily basis. Now, as far as the approvers specifically goes, whether it be out in the field locations or whether it be at a main hub or office or even here at the corporate office, whomever's doing the approvals for you, the export process begins the minute you approve, and at that point, it's like I said, it's very hard to retract. So keep in mind, your approval is your sign-off saying that everything's good, I reviewed it, go ahead and start processing payroll. So the question now, which is more of the general question we get on a day-to-day basis, is how is JDE now interacting with Epay? So we know what the users are doing, but how does the JDE get that information over to Epay? So JDE sends basically the following data, which is employees, jobs, and work orders every 30 minutes daily during the business day. So every 30 minutes, what that basically means is at the very top of the hour, at the bottom of the hour. So as I always joke around, at the 00 and at the 30, the system is going to send the employees, any new employees that have been hired in the system. And when I say by hired, they have to have a status of initiate hire from an applicant standpoint. And I believe that's code 70 offhand. I might be wrong, but I think it's code 70, initiate hire. And then or be outright hired and a full employee record already be created for them. Regardless, a new employee in those scenarios would get sent over every 30 minutes. That also includes any changes to an employee record. So any changes you do to an employee record, whether it be changing the default job, the task they work, whatever it may be on the JDE side, it'll be sent over to Blueforce within that 30-minute window. Same with jobs. When a job's created, I know many of you on here really don't have the final, setup of the job, and I think you provide a few bits of information, but corporate finance goes in and pushes those jobs over. Same thing with those. As soon as jobs are available or activated in the system, they'll spit over within that 30-minute window over into Blueforce. Now, one thing about jobs that I'll address is that jobs also have some other criteria fields on there that you may or may not be familiar with from a field perspective. For example, some of these jobs have a end date applied to them. And that's a system requirement from the JDE side. That's a requirement that we've put in for several months now. The one thing, as we've noticed on a recently, and it seems to all happen in big globs at a time, is that a lot of jobs are being inactivated, and that is because of this change, this end date that's on the job record. We have a interface that goes out there to keep our jobs clean and fresh, and it actually goes out there and looks at these dates and will go and inactivate them on the JD Edwards side. Now, when the system automatically inactivates a job, that immediately within that 30-minute window goes and inactivates that in Blueforce. So what occurs at that point is that your users, your employees can't clock into that job, your users can't see that job from a editor, submitter, or approver role, and any time that you have out there that an employee's clocked in or out on that inactive job now, is still available in Blueforce. You just can't do anything with it. So we get a lot of calls asking to reactivate those jobs. I bring that up because, like employees, jobs, and the next topic I'll talk about work orders, if something's inactive in Blueforce, it must, and repeat, it must be reactivated over in JDE before you can do anything in Blueforce. The one thing, and it's one of the things noted a little further down on this slide, is JDE is our system of record. Anytime you have any issues with any of the information that's in Blueforce, like once again, it relates to employees, jobs, or work orders, you must go back to JDE, whether it be you yourself on this phone call or whomever takes care of that task of keeping this information current in JDE. That person or persons need to actually update that information, and within that 30-minute window, it'll come back over to Blueforce. Now, the only thing that on that 30-minute window that is not true is the change of pay group or change of pay rate for the employee record. Now, one thing I'll show you here a little bit from a demo standpoint is that way you can actually see in Blueforce that kind of help you is the employee record. Whenever a pay rate occurs during a pay period, in the middle of a or a pay group change, the system queues it up to occur at the start of the next pay period. Pay week. Let me correct myself. Next pay week. So that being said, if I were to get a raise today and I activate it effective today in JDE, or even better, I have a pay group change effective today, Blueforce, to not create any issues and mess with anything up it's in the system currently for this current week or current pay period, we'll simply queue up that change and have it be applied in the wee hours of Saturday morning. So Saturday is the start of our new pay week. So often when these changes occur, we always get calls, and me, myself, and Tiandra get calls asking, I have a pay group change. Why is it not applied yet? And simple, it's almost like a safety measure that Blueforce has built in, that it wants to protect and make sure that nothing is incorrectly changed to any other data or time that's already in the system. So it goes and queues it up at the beginning of the next pay week. So I'll show you that little screen here momentarily so you can kind of get an idea of how I can go and maybe see what's going on with my job records if you're interested. But nevertheless, my employee records. But more so, with jobs, once again, if they're inactive, we need to turn them on in JDE first. And one thing I point there before I go to work orders, one of the things I point there is that all interfaces are one way. And I'll stress that. That basically means that the interfaces are sending data from JDE to Blueforce. So whatever's in JDE is what's going to take precedence and actually show up in Blueforce. So just because we've had many requests asking, can you just go and activate it real quick for me in Blueforce, and we won't have to worry about it, so I can finish my payroll, or I can go through and finish my coding my time to job, whatever it may be. The answer is yeah, sure we could, but it's not the proper way of doing it. And the reason being is if I go and change something in Blueforce, once again, JDE knows that this record in Blueforce should reflect a certain value based on what's set up in JDE. So it's not going to help anything if I go and activate it, because within the next 30-minute window, guess what? It's back to how it was. So keep in mind, JDE is a system of record. Work orders, same thing. Work orders need to be set up in JDE, and they will flow over to Blueforce within the next 30-minute window. Same thing, if they're inactivated in Blueforce, inactivated in JDE, then they'll be inactive in BlueForce. The question with the work orders that I get all the time is, I see too many work orders. I think work orders is one of those tasks that's not maintained as closely as a job setup is. So what sometimes occurs is you may go to a Walter device, have the employee go clock in there at the Walter device, and when it prompts them for a work order, if they want to go to a work order, they may see, a list of 10 work orders. In reality, only 4 of those are really still active. So if they're still considered active in JDE, bottom line, and you don't want them to be active anymore, you need to go to JDE to deactivate them, inactivate them, and then once they're done being inactivated, then we can actually rerun with the next interface. We'll rerun all those processes and send the accurate data over to BlueForce. So as I mentioned, all these are one-way interfaces, but the bottom line here is the JDE information is incorrect. Your information over in BlueForce will be incorrect. Now, one thing that will typically happen is and I use employees because employees is where we always see this happening. If an employee is set up with a task that's not valid to the jobs that you're trying to assign to them from JDE, BlueForce knows this, and BlueForce will reject that record. So typically what happens is we have the argument that my employee was set up in JDE, but I don't see it in BlueForce, and the system has to be doing something wrong. Well, technically no. The system is protecting itself because it's validating against the right information, because it wants to only the right information or valid information put into BlueForce. So if you set up an employee record or I was throwing a job record or work order incorrectly over in JDE, BlueForce will not accept that information. So you may be, a little behind the curve there, waiting for data to show up when in reality it's never going to show up because there's an error. So I just bring that up because occasionally we'll get that call saying that, I can't find my employee or my employee set up, what's going on? More than likely an employee doesn't have all the information filled in, or bottom line has maybe a wrong task, could be assigned to a different wrong pay group. Might be an issue on the employee record that's causing this to hang up. But bottom line, as I mentioned, JDE is the system of record, and all the data that comes from JDE is kind of just, I guess the process, the interface is just kind of validating everything and spitting it over into BlueForce. So once again, last time I'll say it, but any corrections to this data have to be done in JDE. So let me stop right there. I'm going to log into BlueForce, and I just want to show you a quick snippet of what I was talking about as far as the big issue of pay groups and pay rates that sometimes doesn't always just flow automatically into BlueForce. All right, so everyone, notice here, and I logged in as a submitter on purpose so you could actually see the colors on the screen. And for those that have not joined us on a couple of webinars in quite some time, or maybe probably the last month and a half, 2 months, we made some changes a while back called Granular security changes that actually color code your screen a little bit. So anywhere you see orange on here, those are read-only areas where you can only see items if you have the access to seeing them. See information there, but you can't edit. Any tabs that are in blue, those tabs can be editable by your role. So you can actually go in there and mess around and make some updates if need be. But the one I want to bring to your attention is this one called Pay Group History. And Pay Group History at the bottom of the screen. And what I'll do for you is I'm going to go ahead and circle that. Just going to change my color here. There we go. So Pay Group History right down here. That tab allows you to see all the history, that's kind of broken out for that employee as far as pay group and pay group changes. Now, everyone is automatically going to have a pay group listed down there with the actual effective from date. The to date's always going to be blank unless you have multiple changes have occurred. But what this is telling you is that this pay group was effective on a specific day, and was last changed or applied to this employee on that particular day in question. So my employee here, Edward, that I use all the time, he was actually created, his employee record was probably more likely created, or once again, his payment was assigned to him on that particular day, which was August the 12th of 2014. One of the things he'll tell you also is the source, and this just says it was a setup. This is the process. It's through setup. Typically, the source there would just kind of give you a hint of how it was brought over. And then lastly, the status will show success. If you don't see success there, then obviously the change did not occur. Now, once again, you have no control to this tab. It's only a view only for everyone who's a submitter and approver on this phone call. But this is where you can actually go and see when, what the status is. If it says in queue, basically it's just waiting until Saturday morning to basically apply it to all the records. So I just bring this up so you can kind of have a little knowledge, I guess, to how the information gets carried over. Now, one of the questions I was just asked, and it's a good point to bring it up here, is how do I update the default site? So, good question. So on this screen, while you're up here, you'll notice that the default site here is a section that I mentioned here that is in orange. So there's a little section up here called payroll information. It's all sections in orange, meaning you can edit. So as a submitter, approver, whatever role you have, you can edit that screen. And once again, you can edit that default site there because that is the default job information from JD Edwards. So if you need to update someone's default site, we need to go into JD Edwards, change the default job there, and within the next 30-minute window, the system will come over here and update that information on the employee record itself. Now, while we're on that topic, once again, that's default job. You have access to changing that in JD, or maybe you don't have the access to JD. Maybe someone does that deals closely with you. Maybe your payroll admin or somebody has access. I think you go through a little queuing table, I forget the term, the staging table to get those changes done. But nevertheless, someone has access to get in there and kick that off. Now, while we're on that topic, down here at the bottom, you do have a tab called Working Job, and I'm just going to address it real quick. Working Job allows you to go in there and basically see all the jobs that the employee is eligible to work. So when I click on Working Job, there on the right-hand side, that little section here that says Assigns Jobs, these are the jobs that the employee can clock in and out of. So one of the things you'll notice is the default job is always going to be one of the jobs in this section. So if it's not in this section, any other job that you want the employee to clock into must be added down here manually by using the search area on the left-hand side of the grid, or the little tab down here, and then click Assign here in the middle, and that'll bring over those jobs one by one. Everyone on this phone call, submitters and approvers, have access to doing this, so keep that in mind. You do have access to going in and maintaining the working job aspect of that employee. We did a webinar on that whole piece of working jobs probably about 6 weeks ago, so that is recorded as well. I have that out on YouTube if you have to ever go back and want to refresh how to do the working jobs other than what I just mentioned right now. All right. So let's move on to the next part of this is, we talked about data interacting between JDE and Epay. So how does the data get over to our time collection devices? So what happens is Blue Force is communicating with all the Walter devices. So let's talk about just the time clocks first. The time clocks are based on a sync schedule that each clock is set up on. Now these clocks will sync several times a day on a plain schedule that we have already set up here at corporate, and all the clocks are on the same schedule. But if at any point you know that there was a change made to an employee and it's already gotten into Blue Force, you can actually go over to the Walter clock. There's a little arrow, it's a little blue key with 2 arrows on it, circular arrows, that allow you just to sync up information at any time. Now this sync schedule that I'm talking about is primarily there to transfer information, job, employee information. If you make a change to an employee's working job, it'll sync that employee information to that new job added if they have a clock. So anything dealing with the work orders, the jobs, or the employees can be accessed or sent over to the Walter clock by the sync button. Otherwise, you can just let it wait, and it'll sync periodically throughout the day several times. Now, there is a secondary part of this, obviously, are the punches. The punches you don't even talk about, but the punches do get sent over with the sync process as well. Now, a lot of those clocks in the field that are set up as LAN clocks, which is local area network clocks, basically you're plugged into a connection in the wall, more likely, that's provided by the customer, or maybe we had to pay for it, but regardless, it's a network connected clock. Those clocks are actually set up on a sync schedule that every 5 minutes it's sending punches. So it keeps Blue Force updated more frequently. But those 5 minutes only are for punches. The sync schedules are there primarily, like I said, for the data. So the heavier amounts of information are sent back and forth through that sync schedule. Now, most of the clocks that are not connected via the LAN connected, those clocks that are using cellular, Wi-Fi, dial-up, maybe it's a handful that are doing dial-up, or those that obviously are not connected. Those are not going to be live, obviously. Those are going to be a little delayed, and those actually only sync on the sync schedule that's out there on those clocks. So you won't see the every 5 minutes seeing a punch is being sent to Blue Force. So those clocks aren't quite live as we want them to be, but the data does get over there within a couple hours. You'll see that data over in Blue Force. Now, phone-in, mobile punch, and web punch, those are pretty much our live applications, meaning that within minutes, often within seconds, but I say often within minutes of you punching in on one of those devices, the data will be available to you in Blue Force. So you can actually see the punches, you can see the employees, and all that good stuff. Now, same as the concept of the information coming from Epay, when the information from jobs, employees, and work orders hit Epay, those devices, the phone and the mobile and web punches, automatically get updated and automatically have that information. So the minute it hits JD, that you make a change in JD, within that 30-minute window, you'll be able to have employees use the phone and mobile punch and web punch and see that data there live and ready to go. It's the Walter device that have a little longer delay just because they're not always LAN connected. And that's perfectly fine. Just wanted to bring that up so everyone's on the same page with that. Now, many people always ask, so where do I see the current schedule, or how do I know these clocks are syncing or what's going on? So just kind of give you a little insight from the world of Blue Force again. I'm going to go over here to the jobs section and job area. I'm just going to pick up one of my jobs here. Let's do my main office. Actually, let's go back here fast. So when I go into my job record, and you can go to any jobs that have a clock set up or even a phone in and see some information in here. But from the tab down here at the bottom, it's in orange. It's called phone in and time clock setup. Right, phone in and time clock setup in blue. I'm sorry, the blue tab. That blue tab allows you to now go in there and actually edit that section. Now, one thing you can actually do is if you have a phone in, which is basically the phone system that's being used at your sites, you can actually go down here at the bottom section, go in here and key in all of your registered phone numbers. That way the system automatically recognizes what numbers are valid, and you can actually go in here and type in all the different numbers. We did a webinar on that little piece on one of these tips and changes about 6 weeks ago that we covered all that. But essentially, go in and put in your phone number. No, no commas, no dashes, no punctuation whatsoever. Just the 10-digit number followed by a comma, the next number, comma, and so forth. No spaces between those commas either. And the system, and then go ahead and save, and the system will record that information. Now, on the flip side of this, you can always go down here to the bottom of the screen and actually see the synchronization schedule if it's a Walter, and see what times your Walters are syncing at. So if you're ever wondering, this clock, it says it last synced at 3 a.m. Is that right? Is that valid? You come down here at the bottom and say, oh yeah, look, this device will sync at 3 a.m., 9 a.m., 3 a.m., 4, 5, 6, and 9. So this device is set up to sync on 7 times a day. But it's just a side note that you have the ability to go in there and see this information right there on the phone in and time clock setup tab. Now, on the other side of the coin, you may be using mobile, you may be using some of these other devices. On that particular tab, which is now in orange, the mobile device tab, we don't want you to go in there and change any of the mobile settings because that is kind of where all the GPS information, all that stuff is gathered from. So we don't want to mess with the geo coordinates and stuff on this tab. But once again, this doesn't give you any indication that for sure you're using the system. What it's telling you is just these are the settings and whatnot behind Mobile Punch if this site were to use that option of clocking in and clocking out. But nevertheless, phone in and time clock setup and mobile configuration are where you can actually see those settings. Like I said, I kind of veered off a little bit, but I wanted to make sure that everyone has that information. So from a process standpoint, just keep in mind, time collection devices are all live, except for the Walters that are cell connected, Wi-Fi connected, or dial-up. And the main reason for that is because the bandwidth. It just takes a lot longer to download, and the speed is really does not the best in those avenues versus LAN connected clock. So that's kind of just a big picture. I just kind of want to go through and make sure everyone was kind of up to date on the Blue Force payroll process as far as how things kind of talk, and everyone understands that 30-minute window from making changes in JDE, which is our system of record, over to getting that information to Blue Force. So one of the questions was, how can we change the time and add more sync times? Well, if you really need to add more sync times to your clocks, we can first go there and look and see how many syncs you have. If I'm mistaken, this is my test clock that I was showing you on my screen, my test job. I don't have that many syncs scheduled for it, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe all the clocks have at least 8 sync times that are set up on them, which we can take it up to 12 if need be. Right now, all the clocks, unless you've requested otherwise, are set up all with the same sync times, just for the simple fact that it's easy for us to say, oh, all the clocks sync at 3 a.m. or all the clocks sync at 11 p.m. And that's kind of why everyone's on the same sync schedule right now. But if you need to add more additional times, what I ask you to do is give us the asset ID for that clock and then provide us the times that you need added. And just do that via a help desk ticket. That's probably the quickest avenue to do that. All right, so let's move right along. Let's go into our next topic, and it's just basically time cards versus time sheets. It seems like a simple topic, but it's still a big question, especially with our editors and submitters out there in the field. They need to know, when do I use a time card, when do I use a timesheet, and hopefully this explanation will make it very simple as to what scenario to use what. Now, first off, let me just point out my quick slide here. It has 2 columns as to when you should use a time card and when you should use a time sheet. Now, keep in mind, time cards always reflect the employee's punches, and I call them the raw punches because you go to the time card, you can actually see the in and out punches for anybody that worked, and it's actually going to show you, they punched in at 3:57, it's going to show you 3:57. They clocked out at 5:06, it's going to show you 5:06 on the actual time card. So that's what the raw punches are preserved. Now, one of the things you have to keep in mind is it's just the punches that are in the time cards. There's not going to be any OT initially. There's not going to be any pay differentials initially. There's not going to be any auto-deducted lunch breaks initially in the time card screen. Time card is strictly for the actual in and out punches for our employees. Bottom line, you can go in here and basically use the time card screen to add or change if you need to, and I say stress, you shouldn't ever have to change an employee's punch. There are some valid times you have to do that, but bottom line, time cards are really for your hours worked. So when anybody goes and actually works hours, put them into the time card. Now on the timesheet side, the timesheet is actually just a quick process. And one of the things I'll point out to you, and I think it makes it very I had some users I was working with yesterday, and I brought this one piece up yesterday with them, and I won't say names or who they were, where they're at, but I think it made sense if you look at the home screen. The home screen shows you how the flow of process of the Blue Force should work. So the home screen shows you that you start with employees. Obviously, employees are assigned to jobs. They go to a job site, to a specific job site, in which they clock in, and the clock-ins are recorded in the time cards. And then once the time cards are accumulated and they have an in and out punch, the system will send that time to timesheets. And timesheets now is what's going to reflect the time that the employee worked after calculations have hit that time. So timesheets will, during this process of coming in from time cards to timesheets, the system is applying overtime rules, applying any lunch rules, it's applying any pay differentials. So from that perspective, if it involves OT, pay differentials, and lunch, you're going to see that in the timesheet view. Okay, so real quick, let's go back to my my slide here. So the slide here now goes on and basically shows you that the timesheets reflect those time changes with the time rules that have applied to that time. You can go here and now add change non-worked hours. So from a timesheet view, that's where you go in there and put in your sick, vacation, holiday, non-work. Now, if you wanted to go into a time card and put in a sick entry, you could. However, keep in mind the time card reflects that you have to put in an in and an out time. The timesheet view is strictly whole hours. So if I go in to March the 10th, Christian was out, he was sick, and I need to note that he's 8 hours of sick pay or sick leave, and my union says I can get sick leave. I can go through there. I wouldn't do it myself, but someone would go into my timesheet and put in just simply 8 hours at sick leave rate on the timesheet. I'm going to go through that real fast just as a review here momentarily. But timesheet should also be used for manual job entry. So the easiest way, and there's some of those scenarios where you can go either way, either or, but to keep this very simple, time cards, majority of the time is just going to be for hours worked. Timesheets, the majority of the time will be just for non-worked hours, or kind of go in there to check on a variety of those rules. So if you ever go to a timesheet view, you can actually see the total hours for everybody, for every employee that worked. But for those that have access to seeing pay rates, you can actually go and see the shift differentials, if there's shift differential rules involved, or any other pay rules, and if it affects their rates, their pay rate, or to see what rule was applied. All that information is available for you on the timesheet view. So I have a couple questions. Let me see. I think I've answered a couple of these. So a question: how can I add time to a timesheet for an employee who has no time card for the time period? No time card means the employee will not have an active timesheet. Understood, but I guess my next question for this user would be is if they have no timesheet and they have worked, then what you should probably be doing is taking that work time and keying in as a time card. My next question would be is if they are working and they're not punching in using one of the time collection methods, why aren't they using the time collection methods? I guess that's my first question. But more importantly, if they did work, then you can create a time card for them because we want to actually record those worked hours. Now, if they're eligible for a timesheet, maybe like vacation or something like that, and they didn't work that week, but you need to add it in the system, then you can go to the timesheet and just add those entries into the timesheet view. So let me stop right there real fast because once again, and it was vacation. That's perfect. So vacation is handled straight through the timesheet. Very simple way of doing that. So let me go back into my screen here. And let me just show you my time cards. So these are my time cards that are right now. So once again, the time card screen, as I mentioned, is there to show you the raw punches. So like these that I'm circling here, notice that they're clocking in. These are not rounded punches. These are actually punches that someone actually went to the clock, went to the phone, went to the mobile app, whatever it may be, went to the web punch, and actually punched in at. Raw punches, in and outs. Now there is a column here. They recently changed the header title. It used to say rounded hours, and I think that caused some confusion because people were thinking time cards, did all the rounding. Well, it really doesn't do rounding on the time card level. However, it does give you a little snapshot of what that rounding amount might turn out to be, barring any other complication, I guess you could say, of the time record. But nevertheless, those are the hours that would be shown over in the timesheet view. So once again, time cards this reflects the employee's punches that they actually made, nothing more, nothing less. Now, if I take that what I just mentioned over to the timesheet view here, the timesheet view now, you notice the minute you go to your timesheets, you don't see employees right off the bat. You see jobs. So your jobs. So from these jobs, you see total hours. Okay. And I'm logged in as a submitter right now, so I don't see all the dollar information. But if I'm an approver or I have a submitter with that pay rate access, there is a whole section in here that's actually included. All this stuff, all these other columns move to the right. They'll show you the dollars behind all of these jobs. And I think that's probably the biggest maybe breakdown on this process, because some of you want to see that information, but you don't have the access to see it. Now you can always request that access via the help desk, but we also to a help desk ticket, but we will have to verify with your management that you indeed should have that proper access. And I just bring that up because I know the HP team has a big the IFS side, I guess the whole IFS team has been kind of not given that access as a submitters only get to see the hours, they don't get to see the dollars. So that tends to be a big topic of discussion whenever you want to talk about shift differentials or see specific pay from this screen. Now from that as well, I mean, once you go from this particular screen, I can actually drill down into the actual job. I click on the job record, and when I drill down into it, I can actually see the employee information. Okay, so here now I see all the information on the employees and when they actually worked. Now, let's say I'm in here, and notice this is my job. It's up here listed at the top of the screen. These are all my entries that are in here, but you'll notice that everybody in here is just showing regular time. So the question I asked me about it a little while ago is, how do I enter vacation? Maybe I have an employee that didn't work this week and I need to add vacation. Not a big deal. All we're going to do in here, and let me clear my green arrows, there is a little link called Add a Row. It's available at the top left-hand corner of that grid, and that's going to allow you to add a new row to this particular grid down below. So when I click on Add Row, the system will provide you a new row, and it blends it in, and so don't panic when you see this, but it blends it in right here. That's a new row. And what you're going to do now is you're going to be able to now go and select the employee. The job has to be the same. I mean, it's there for a reason, it's to kind of validate. But you pick the employee that you need to have applied to this timesheet. So if I'm going to give someone 3 days vacation and 8 hours each of those days, I'd first select the employee. And notice if I go through here, I'm looking for, let's say I'm looking for someone in here, and I can't find that employee. I'm like, okay, what's the alphabetical order? What's going on? If that employee is unavailable on this list, you have to keep in mind that that employee does not have this job as his or her working jobs. So I would say stop here, go to the employee profile, go down to working jobs, and validate that that job that you're trying to add vacation to or whatever it may be for that employee is on that working jobs tab. If it's not, add it. And if it is there, then come back over here and look again, because you may have overlooked that employee's name. I'm going to go ahead and use John Doe. I saw Jane Doe here. And then I'm going to go over here to my task, pick the task that he or she would probably work if she was here that week. In most cases, that person's default task would automatically pop in there for you. Otherwise, you can drop down and change it. If you want to code that to a work order and vacation, I don't think you would, but if you had to, you could choose your work order there. Once again, if there's an active work order, show there. If it's inactive, go back to that conversation I had earlier. You make sure you go back and activate it in JDE, let it wait 30 minutes, and then come back and try again. But the key thing here is to make sure it shows the proper rate type. So in this case, vacation, and let's say we're going to give Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday are the vacation hours. Notice I just entered 8 hours. All we're doing here is entering whole hours. We're not doing anything more, nothing less. We're not putting any specific times. Just put in 8 hours. Now, what's going to happen here, the minute I go in and hit save, the system says, you know what, I do need to create a record over in time cards to reflect this. So sometimes what happens is you'll see a vacation over the time card. You're like, well, this employee didn't clock in, and the employee's not even here. Why does he have a time card? The system always goes and backfills the time card screen. So don't panic when you see that. All the system's going to do over on the time card side is it's going to create an entry. It's probably going to be for that particular day you entered here, and it's going to be from the time of more likely 0000, which is midnight, to 8 a.m. for 8 hours of pay. Doesn't mean anything. It's just going to backfill itself to keep a record in kind of in sync with a timesheet. So anytime you add a manual, any entry to this screen, it's just going to, like I said, backfill it back on the other side. Not a big deal. Just want to address that for everybody. Let me go through my questions here. I've got a few more that popped in here. Let's see. All right, so I have a question that says, when you have a payout of vacation of 3 weeks, which is 120 hours, I find it difficult to enter when an employee has worked 8 hours each day, but no more than the 23-hour per day rule. All right, so just to keep everyone kind of abreast of what's going on here, so there is a rule that's in the system that says you can't enter more than 23 hours a day for an employee. So whether he worked it or you manually entered it, and a total combination of hours cannot be more than 23 hours in a day. You just can't do it. So the system prevents you from doing that. Now, the question becomes, I have a payout of 3 weeks. I need to do that this week. How do I get it done? Well, you have to keep in mind, if you want to put it on the same current pay period, you have to keep in mind that you can't enter more than 23 hours in a day. You just can't get around that. So depends on how you cut different approaches you want to do to this. I've seen different ways of people doing this, but when you have to do a big lump like that, it becomes very hard to do it in a week by week period. I would urge you to spread out amongst different weeks if you can. We had a request for I think 5 or 6 weeks at one point, and they went into the manual timesheet and kind of spread it out on previous weeks just to be able to go in and pay that employee. So when you have that issue, just go to the help desk and we can help you with the proper solution. But there's different ways of doing that. I can't say one's better than the other, but we have to contend with that 23-hour-a-day rule. There's just no way around that, unfortunately. We do have an other pay column on the far right-hand side that you can go in there and key in other pay. If you have access to seeing that field, you can go in there and, if the vacation equates to $600, you can go in there and put in $600. However, you always want to tag it with that rate type of vacation. The only thing about doing it that way or paying anything out of other pay, it doesn't keep that balance in check on the employee record. So like one thing I mentioned here, let me go back to the employees. I'm kind of jumping around here, but this is a good question. I'm just to make sure we cover. Every employee has that tab, and I covered this on a prior webinar, but it's called PTO or personal time off. This tab always gives you a balance of how much time has been used for that employee for that given period or range that you may or may not be using this, but it always still calculates that information for you. So every employee in the system that's ever used a PTO-related entry is going to have something in here showing for them. But you can actually go in here and, like I said, if you do the other pay way that I mentioned, it won't accurately show your used hours. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But I would say once you actually get that scenario and you have it in your hand, you really want to figure out how you want to approach it. Go and put a help desk ticket, and we can always walk you through it if you have any issues. All right, so I think that goes to most of the questions there we've gone through as it relates to all of these timesheets. But bottom line, time cards versus timesheets. Time cards, raw punches, worked hours. Timesheets, most of the time, non-worked hours, and any manual type of scenarios like vacation, sick, PTO-related issues, stuff like that would go on the timesheet. Now, one of the two things as well, just to point out, is time cards really doesn't get you any, time cards is just really just like the raw punches. And people always ask, there's no report, nothing here for me. If I need a listing of all the punches, there's no report. How can I get a report? Well, the best way to do it is there's a function at the very top of the screen, and that function is simply called Export to Excel. So I'm just bringing this up. I've said this many times before, but you can always click on Excel export to Excel, and we'll export this time cards, the time cards for you. Should you ever need to do that, just bring it up. It's there for you. You also have that functionality, as I mentioned a couple weeks back as well on the this webinar. The timesheets have two options at the very top that you can also export this screen, which is called a summary screen, or if you want the details will export all the employee information when you've actually drilled down into a timesheet. That is part of that export details, and that is actually sent out to Excel as well. So you do have some functionality there if you need to ever do some exports. But bottom line, that is really the difference between time cards versus timesheets. And kind of will tell everyone if you have any more further questions as far as when to use what or how to use it, and or how to explain, go down a little bit more further down with this process, just reach out to either Tiana or myself, and we can give you a better explanation at that time. But time cards, once again, raw punches, worked hours, timesheets, basically are summarized hours, and your non-worked hours can be entered there as well. So I hope that kind of clears up some of those differences between the time cards and timesheets. And kind of with that, I'm going to roll into our closing slide. Once again, just want to say thank you for everyone for joining us on today's webinar. This same webinar I'm going to do again on next Tuesday. And as I mentioned at the very start of the call, we won't do a call next Thursday. We'll just kind of have the webinar this week and one next week. And then we'll go back to our normal schedule of Tuesday, Thursday, the following week. So with that, I say thank you for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. And we'll catch you again maybe next Tuesday or maybe the following week on an upcoming webinar. We'll talk to all of you again real soon.